Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, morning. I am so excited to be able to share more information with you on the Community Advisory Board and how we've outlined our approach to it. My name is Dr. Tatiana Bustos, and I am the lead for the participatory governance and community engagement component of the Thriving Communities Grant-Making Program. I'm joined by Dr. Lee Powell Jackson, who leads the external review component of the grant-making program, and I'm my support team with Jackie Mungo, as well as Laura Baum and others. I'm also joined by Tony Jones, who's our deputy director, and they will be helping field some of the questions at the end of our session today. As Patrick mentioned, there is a Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please make sure to ask any questions that may come up. I'm going to go through lots of content, and I'm going to reserve your questions towards the end of today's session, but you can go ahead and add any questions. Jackie Mungo will be moderating the questions for us at the end. So with that, I'm going to give you just a brief overview of today's session. So I'm going to introduce very briefly the Thriving Communities Grant-Making Program. I'll mention that there are very detailed webinars that give you deeper insight into the history of the program, the background, how to apply, and things like that. And I invite you to watch the YouTube channels that provide these links to those recordings accessible to all groups in this call right now. And Laura will share those links in the chat in just a moment. I'm also going to be sharing an overview on the Cultivating Healthy Environments participatory governance structure. What do we mean when we say that? And what does it look like in connection to the application process and decision-making overall of the program? And so I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview on that, and then get into finer details regarding the criteria, recruitment, roles, responsibilities, what you can expect if you were to participate as part of the Community Advisory Board. All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with the Thriving Communities Grant-Making Program. So as I mentioned, lots of recordings are available. The link is in the chat now. If you would like to have more detailed information on the program, I'm just going to give you an abbreviated version of what we've been sharing. And that starts with who we are as an institute first. So with the Environmental Protection Agency's Thriving Communities Grant-Making Program, this is a cooperative agreement that has been contracted with RTI International, which is who's hosting this call today. And RTI International has been selected as the grant maker for National Central, Region 4, and Region 7. We're also serving not just the states, but the tribal nations embedded within those areas as well. If you're not familiar with RTI International, we are an independent nonprofit institute that provides lots of research, evaluation, technical assistance to clients worldwide, including federal agencies like EPA. Where this project sits is through leadership in the Transformative Research Unit for Equity, which is where I sit in particular, and so does Tony Jones. And our unit is really focused on transforming systemic approaches to how we understand processes. So that means how can we embed community members' voices and perspectives into the way that we're doing things to create new systems or refine systems in a way to advance social justice work. And at the bottom of this slide, you'll see lots of our partners. So this is not something that is done in silo. It's a collaborative effort, and some of our partners for Region 4 are explicitly listed here. There are also other partners that are not included in the current slide, but there is more information on the website. Okay, next slide, please. So that's a little bit about who we are. Now, in connection to the program, so RTI has been selected as the grant maker of this TCGM program, that it's the Thriving Communities Grant-Making Program that has been developed to support capacity building through assessment, planning, and project development. And you'll see that this is directly connected to the types of funding opportunities that are made available to community members. The overall goal of the program is to increase efficiency and reduce barriers to accessing federal grant funding. And the way that we have demonstrated this is through our application design, our review process. And so the objective of this program is to really ensure that these federal grants are accessible to community members, that you're able to use them for the impact that you want to make to address environmental concerns and so on. The other important element is that we are encouraging meaningful involvement of community members in decision-making that may affect their communities. This is the third tier of the program's objectives, and we've also applied this in the way that we've created our grant-making strategy, including community advisory board members, external reviewers, tribal liaisons, as well as who's on our partner teams. Oh, I just want to make sure that folks are able to see the slides for just a quick second. If you all can let me know in the chat or a thumbs up.
I can see them.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure there were some tech errors. I appreciate that participation. Okay, so moving forward, I mentioned earlier just now that one of the objectives of the program is to support assessment, planning, capacity building, and this is directly related to the types of funding opportunities that you have available through this Thriving Communities Grant-Making Program. So there are 3 different tiers to competitive funding opportunities. The costs are listed here. Each of them are slightly different. And then there's also a pool of funds for non-competitive projects. The general idea is that we are trying to support different types of projects that may be research, partnership building, outreach, maybe even implementation, trying to develop an implementation plan. And again, there's lots of detailed webinars that walk you through your eligibility, your project eligibility, how do you apply for each of these in the YouTube channel and on the website. I'm not going to have a chance to walk through this, but I just want to emphasize the overall mission of the program and how it's tied to the funding opportunities that are available to you. This is also connected to the types of awards that the Community Advisory Board members will be involved in. And I'll share more about that. I'm just setting the ground here. So next slide, please. So with the application submission and review timelines, we have an open application that will be wrapping up January 31st. That does not necessarily mean that we will stop reviewing applications. Applications are being submitted on, are being reviewed on a rolling basis, and so you can continue to submit and obtain feedback in that way. Or the next timeline will be April 30th. Again, you do not have to wait until April 30th to submit. We will consider all applications on a rolling basis. In terms of how, where your application goes after you submit, we have an initial administrative review process, and the next slide gives a little bit more detail about what that looks like. And then we have a community guided process where your application actually sits in the hands of a community advisory board for them to make ultimate decisions about whether or not they get funded. So that's a little bit more about the connections between the applications and the community review process. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the application review process, it's really important that we emphasize what we mean by participatory governance structure and explain the concept itself. And so if you're not familiar with this term, it's really about positioning local communities, people with lived expertise as decision makers for making these decisions that impact everyday lives. And so part of the grant making process is really to ensure that we're taking this transformational approach to grant making and with the purpose of streamlining the federal grant making process. It's also in line with the program objectives that I shared earlier. And so our approach to grant making that's tied to this participatory governance structure is to ensure that we are inviting local perspectives, local diverse perspectives, so that we can understand the context. Only folks who with those experiences understand what works best. There's also a component related to the way that we're focusing on systems change. So it's not just about providing this funding opportunity and leaving you to do it yourself, but we're also thinking about the level of support that you will need to be successful. And we apply that as well for our community advisory board members. And the last piece about thinking about how we can center perspectives and worldviews throughout the process of this program. So it's not just at the beginning, at the end, but throughout. So as we're engaging with community members, as we're inviting external reviews for input, we're also engaging with our grantees along the way. And so there's lots of different ways that we're thinking about embedding these core components into our grant making strategy, again, that directly align to the program objectives to empower communities to voice their concerns and address be equipped to address environmental issues through their organizations, through their projects. So, okay, and that ties into the piece about the guided by community process. I think that's what it was. So this is guided by community in different ways. We have community advisory boards, which is why you're here today, and I'll dive deeply into this, who will review applications. They'll decide who gets funding. We also have external reviewers, which we have upcoming webinars next week. Dr. Lee Pao Jackson will be walking us through a little bit more about what that looks like. And the external reviewers are community representatives, technical representatives who will support the community advisory boards by evaluating applications. And both community advisory boards and reviewers bring a certain level of expertise that's connected to not just the technical piece, but their lived experiences and understanding environmental issues, understanding different topic areas, different communities, and that's really what we're hoping to leverage as a partnership. The tribal liaisons is another component that's guiding our outreach process with the grant making program. And so it's all about transparency here and sharing more about how community members are guiding that process. And tribal liaisons for this program are our trusted messengers who are helping us create links with tribal nations in Region 4 and Indigenous peoples as well. So I'm going to dive more deeply into the community advisory boards and share a little bit about the vision. Who makes up the community advisory boards. I always like to share the vision of the community advisory boards as being everyone on this call. If you've joined today, I think that this is really about you positioning yourselves as decision makers with that lived experience and understanding of the environmental issues that are impacting your communities in a deep way. And so we invite you to be part of this community advisory board that's essentially about positioning communities as decision makers, knowing that they can have the power to address concerns through these funding opportunities and really leverage their expertise to make informed decisions about which applications should be awarded, which applications will reach the impact that it's promising to make in the description of the submissions and things like that. So here's a clip of, that image was a clip of our introduction to the grant making program. It's also on our website if you want to just learn more about the introductory version of this. Sorry, thanks, Patrick. So part of building this participatory governance structure also requires a lot of internal work. And so as we're approaching this, we are bringing in partnership principles that are important. And so our team engages in this training to ensure that we're leveraging best practices. Because we are inviting community members to be part of this process. And so it's really important that we're mindful about the biases that we hold and that we're open to learning about different experiences, different ways of understanding the issue. We're making sure that we're going to create an environment that balances power and shared decision-making for more efficient meetings, successful decisions that are made in a respectful manner. And fostering relationships with transparency, with clear and frequent communication, with our goal of enhancing our trustworthiness as RTI and making sure that those relationships that we build with community advisory board members foster a sense of community ownership, that we're setting grounds for mutual and beneficial outcomes. It's not just about serving us and our goals, but also the goals of communities and sustainable and longer term impacts. So with that, this is just a little bit more about the principles that we've brought to this work. So all these different pieces connect to the community advisory board. So what does that look like in the Thriving Communities Grant Making Program? And so I mentioned that there is an administrative review. So what happens after you submit your application, right? And I mentioned that there was an initial administrative review. These are some of the steps that are embedded in that process. So during the administrative review, your applications get checked for any missing information, any support needed to refer to TICTAC, and provides you with the opportunity to make corrections or provide any additional information to complete your application. Once that's completed, there is an external review process, which connects back to what I mentioned with Dr. Lee Powell Jackson. There's upcoming webinars next week. The external reviewers provide information about the project feasibility of the application, the likelihood of success. And so they really provide this technical review of the overall application to help the community advisory boards make their decision. And so the next phase, once the external reviews are completed, moves into the community advisory boards. And you'll take note that it's called determination. And so it's not just a review that the community advisory boards are doing, but they're also making a determination based upon their review, the information that they get from external reviewers, and through engaged discussions with one another within their respective boards to make funding decisions on all applications that have been assigned to their board. And so the next step after that, once they have these decision-making meetings, is to provide notice of funding decisions, whether or not an application gets funded. And so, and there's also opportunities for the community advisory board members to provide feedback and guidance to applicants, whether or not they have been awarded as well. And so the general idea, the bigger picture here is that community advisory board members, there's an opportunity to make impact for your communities through the applications that get awarded to make that change that you want to see in your area. And so this is just a really powerful position and opportunity to empower community members to be part of our process. Now I'm going to move into criteria and recruitment. So how are we selecting community advisory board members, and how are we conducting outreach to identify them? So we want to make sure that we are transparent about our process, that we outline what we have planned with you all. So the eligibility criteria for the community advisory board members are listed here. There are 4 general criteria, right? So the first is that we are looking for community representation from Region 4 states and 6 tribal nations, and that includes state, local, and indigenous peoples. And you see the states listed here. So if you are not part of Region 4 area, that is something that would disqualify you, not make you eligible to be part of this board. And so the regional area is very important. We're also looking for criteria related to knowledge and lived experiences that can help us better understand the environmental issues of underserved or disadvantaged populations. This is connected back to the mission of an objective of the program. The last 2 items are more about logistics, making sure that the person who is participating on the community advisory board demonstrates an interest and commitment. And I'll share more about what commitment I'm referring to. This includes meetings, trainings, and being able to attend the calls to make decisions for these funding awards. And the last one is conflict of interest. So we have multiple areas for screening conflict of interest to ensure that we're not showing favoritism for certain topic areas or focus areas. And so we have lots of processes in place to ensure that those conflicts of interest are managed. For the eligibility criteria, it's more about the financial relationship. So if you have a financial relationship with the program or in some way that may impact your review or assessment, that would essentially make you ineligible. I'll also mention that if you are applying to be part of the grant making, that does not disqualify you from participating on the community advisory boards. So, and the reason being is that we have 4 different community advisory boards. Each community advisory board is made up of 8 members. Those boards make decisions about funding applications separately. So there is not a point where they come together to discuss application awards. And so there's an opportunity for you, if you are applying for the program for one of the funding opportunities, to also be on the community advisory board, but have no role in reviewing that application because it would be distributed to a separate board. So I want to make sure to mention that. The roles of the community advisory boards are to help us refine the evaluation criteria, so how applications are reviewed, what's prioritized. They will also provide review of grant applications with a keen eye on community impact, community responsiveness. Is the cultural context appropriate? Those types of things. They're also going to be part of planning so that there is continuous improvement of the program in case there are any gap areas or things that we can improve the overall efficiency of the program. Offer feedback and decide which applications get grant funding. That's the most important point, right? So they are positioned as key decision makers who will ultimately decide which applications get awarded. So the selection process will start with a community advisory board interest form. And the interest form is not yet released. It will be released shortly. And I'll share more about how to stay updated on that, but it will start with a set of questions in the interest form. Then it moves into an administrative initial review process where we conduct eligibility checks, conflict of interest screens, and then we're also using a gap analysis to see who's represented in our community advisory board interest form submissions and who's not. Then it moves into a review and assessment process where each submission gets assigned 2 reviewers, and the reviewers complete an assessment using a set of eligibility criteria that I just shared with you. After that, there is a consensus discussion that's made on the selections. And so there is a strong rationale and justification for who we would be selecting. And the final selection would be made soon after, where we would have 4 community advisory boards for Region 4 selected. And so that's a number of 32 seats. So that's a little bit about our selection process. And now moving on to the roles and responsibilities. So what can you be expected to do if you were on this community advisory board? And so I wanted to give you a bit of an overview on what it will look like with an estimation of hours that you can expect as part of this role. So with every community partner that we want to engage, we want to be mindful of setting them up for success. And to do that, we really need to focus on onboarding them to the types of software that they would be using, introduction to the program, having trainings on the overall application review process. And so we would be focusing in on onboarding during the beginning. And that includes the trainings and orientation, a discussion about how we will, what kind of activities we will engage in for consensus discussions. So all the boards are responsible for making decisions about funding awards, but the way that we get there, the types of activities that we engage in together will be co-developed with each of the boards. And so we would work on finalizing the consensus strategy to how we will move towards those final decisions. There's also a couple of surveys, pre-reviewer surveys that will help us determine which applications to assign you with by your interest and availability. And so those are some of the starting points for what you can expect as a community advisory board member. You can expect up to 8 hours for the onboarding component of this board. Afterwards, there are quarterly activities that will be happening throughout the grant program cycle. The first begins with the Community Advisory Board review, where we have the primary, secondary review of applications. You're also, as a Community Advisory Board member, reviewing the external reviews that have been submitted to support you in making your assessment and determination. And then you get to complete your own review or assessment of the application with any additional input or feedback that you would like to provide to the applicants. Once that review process is complete by the Community Advisory Board members, there is a quarterly decision-making meeting that is held where our outcome from that meeting, our objective from that meeting is to make final decisions about who gets awarded. And this happens on a quarterly basis. It moves into that determination phase that you saw earlier from the application process where the funding decisions are made. There's also opportunities for the Community Advisory Board members to provide input on any continuous improvement regarding our process on a quarterly basis. So we want to make sure that we're being mindful of ways that we can improve our collaboration with the Community Advisory Boards together. Time commitment and compensation. So I already shared a little bit more about the onboarding and the amount of time that you can expect and the meetings. So just to reiterate, about 8 hours. The meetings will be taking place on a quarterly basis. They have not been scheduled yet, so it's something that we would work with the Community Advisory Board members' availability to set. The length of service, so we would ideally love to have folks with us throughout this program. We are looking for a minimum of a 12-month term, if that's what's feasible. So either the 12-month term or throughout the whole time, the 3 years of the program. The compensation for your participation as a Community Advisory Board member is $200 per meeting, and that includes the time reviewing the applications. And so this is, again, not just a one-time payment, it's throughout each of the quarterly meetings. The last thing I'll mention is about the community advisory boards is a little bit more about how they will be supported. So I emphasize that we want to empower communities. We want to build community ownership as part of this process. And we will be supporting you with lots of different resources, including training and oversight to get introduced to the grant making program and provide assistance for any technical questions that may arise. We're also providing logistics to facilitate meeting notes, consensus discussion, access to folders, scheduling. We have a CAB coordinator, a community advisory board coordinator who will support us with that. We will also be providing all members with access to platforms that are necessary to submit the reviews with the designated trainings to assist them in being able to have that capacity to use the platforms. And our participatory governance team, which includes me and Jackie, who you'll meet in just a moment, will provide you with ongoing support in those meetings. So we will be providing support in any conflict resolution. And our goal is really to ensure that every meeting is effective, it's a good use of everyone's time, and is respectful throughout the process. So there's probably a pressing question about the Community Advisory Board form. Where do I sign up? Hopefully you're all excited. Right now, we are asking folks to sign up for our updates to stay updated on any upcoming information. So I mentioned that this will be released shortly, and this is the best way to stay connected with us so that you get that update right away. So what you want to do is take a screenshot of this QR code on your phone, and it sends you directly to the subscription form where you can check the box for community advisory boards. You can also check the box for reviewing applications if that enticed you today. And what will happen is you'll get the updates once the interest form is made available. Apologies. Okay, and with that, I will wrap up with questions. Thanks so much, everyone, for your attention.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jackie Mungo, and as Tatiana mentioned, I will be helping with facilitation with the community advisory boards once they're up and running. And today I will be going through you all's questions in the Q&A box. So if you have any questions that come up as we're going through the ones that are currently there, feel free to drop them in the box and we'll get you answers. All right, first up is the tribal liaison able to work with state tribes, not just federally recognized tribes?
Yes, yes, they are able to work with state tribes, indigenous peoples, local tribes as well. And so it's not exclusive to federally recognized tribes. Thank you for your question. We're very mindful of making our awareness of the program accessible to all groups.
Would providing TA for CCG awardees be a conflict of interest?
That is a great question. I think I'm going to toss it over to our Deputy Director, Tony Jones, to answer that one. Oh, no. Okay, there you are.
Sorry about that. I'm actually in the chat right now in the Q&A, responding to some of the questions there. So my apologies for the delay. I just want to make sure I'm answering the live the question that was asked about conflict of interest with CCG, and possibly any other grants there. So we have outlined a set of policies to ensure that we're addressing conflicts of interest. So if there is a perceived conflict of interest, we absolutely would want a potential tribal CAB member to disclose that. But more specifically, to answer your question, we do not foresee there to be a conflict with providing technical assistance in grant programs that are outside of TCGM.
Thank you, Tony.
Sure.
Could you clarify the 8 hours again? Is that at one time or smaller meetings over time?
Yes, so they are smaller meetings over time. It's an estimation of up to 8 hours. So it might look like 3 meetings and the time you take to review recordings, or a document that outlines the steps on how to use a certain software and things like that. And so it's not going to be a one full day meeting. It's going to be a series of shorter meetings, and it's an estimation of up to. Thanks for your question.
If I am very interested in serving on a CAB and I have signed up for the various update channels, is there anything else that I need to do now?
You've done everything that you can at this point, Kenneth. Thank you so much for being interested in the role. If you have any other questions after today, in terms of the commitment, we are happy to take additional questions. But right now, you've done everything that you can to stay updated once that application form is open, or the interest form is open, excuse me.
Where can we find the registration information for the calls next week about the external review process with the other doctor mentioned?
Yes, Dr. Lee Powell Jackson. Yeah. So that link will be shared shortly in the chat. Dr. Lee Powell, I don't know if you have it readily available. She'll post in just a minute.
Yeah, let me frantically find that. Sorry, I'm not prepared.
So we'll make sure to post it in the chat though. Thanks for being curious about that.
How do you determine if you are applying for the correct funding tier? If you have an ongoing project, which tier would be the most suitable for expansion?
Yeah, Portia, that is a very good question. Right. There are webinars that are available to answer that question more directly. And I want to make sure, Tony, that you don't want to share anything in response to that, but we can follow up separately to answer that question directly. That's separate. That's a little bit different from the community advisory boards. But Tony, I don't know if you want to share something else.
Yeah, sure. And you're spot on, Tatiana. So with our focus today around community advisory boards, that's likely why you're not seeing a lot of detail around the program design, but I'm happy to answer that question for you. So your tiers are delineated essentially based on assessment, planning, and full-on implementation and development. So in that assessment, figuring out the work, making sure you have the resources. Do you need plans and figuring out the project goals? And then in that planning phase, now we're ready to move forward and gearing up so that we could, for tier 3, I've been saying essentially put the shovel in the ground. So in tier 3, we're building the widget or implementing the program. And Tatiana is right. I will actually try to grab a screenshot of the webinar slide that delineates the tiers and respond in the chat with that so that you can reference it. It also outlines some examples for you. Looks like there may be some information going in the chat right now. But there are some examples that will also help you to determine which phase of your project work more closely aligns with the appropriate tier. And then I also want to reemphasize what Tatiana said in her slides earlier, that there will be an administrative review. So please do not let determining your tier be a roadblock in you submitting your application. Please select the tier that you believe best aligns, and then our team will also review and provide some input in that administrative review if we find that there is a tier up that may align a little more closely with your project. All right, Tatiana, I'm gonna move back into the chat and see if there's some questions I can help answer there too.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
Approximately how many meetings are held during a quarter, and what is the duration of each meeting?
That's a great question. So we're probably looking at 7 quarterly meetings for both years. That includes a little bit of the third year. So 7, about 14. That's an estimation, and it does not include the trainings. So the onboarding component, those are additional meetings that will be shorter than the decision-making meetings. And they are going to start with 2 hours at the beginning because we're going to be making decisions together. It might take a little bit more time to make decisions with a totally new group. And so we're trying to allocate more time for those types of discussions. And then moving forward, it would be about an hour and 30 minutes. And that does not include the time to review applications that you would take on your own. You have to prepare for that before the meeting.
Are there any in-person meetings?
Jackie, do you want to take that one on?
Sure. I would never say never, but as of right now, we're planning for virtual meetings. When will this presentation be available for us to review?
Yes, I think it'll be available in just maybe a week. And we're only sending it to folks who have registered. And so you should be receiving it as long you're here today. So you will likely be receiving it in email over a week from now. Probably sooner, but just to give us some leeway time. And there will also be the Q&A, the questions portion that's included.
Okay, the remaining questions in the Q&A are all in reference to whether the NOFO is staying on its same timeline, considering the executive actions. So Tony, these are likely questions for you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. I'm actually going to read some of these so that folks know which questions I am addressing with this response. So one question says, do you have any insight on whether the first grant deadline is still moving forward with everything that has happened this week? Another question says, how will executive actions impact the grant making process? Have you all received the funds from EPA? And then the last question that we have captured here says, will the current NOFO be revised to be reflective of the new administration's values, or will the stipulations in the current NOFO remain the same? These are all great questions, and all questions that we have received over the last week that continue to come in, outlining concerns around the program, its vitality, and what the next steps are. Currently, RTI Corporate is in the process of evaluating the impacts of the executive orders and will follow all legal and agency guidance once that becomes available. When those updates become available, we will be sure to share that with program participants and applicants. So for now, if there are no updates or any adjustments on our websites, we are continuing to proceed under the current program guidance as it stands.
Those are all of the questions that are in the Q&A box. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to drop them into the box and we can answer them for you before we wrap up today.
So as folks are trying to think of any burning questions that they might have at the last minute, I just want to emphasize that, we are here to share any additional information about the community advisory boards. If this is something that you're really interested in, please reach out with your questions. We're really looking forward to working with you all as representatives from your communities. And so if there are any details that we can provide to make you feel more confident about showing interest in the role, please feel free to reach out. And that goes next to my next slide with our contact information. If there are no other questions. Oh, please remember to sign up for our updates. Our Community Advisory Board interest form will be released shortly. And this is the best way to keep in touch with us. And then I did want to share my contact information in the next slide for any additional questions. Okay, I see the question. Jackie, can I jump in? And so I see a question from Tiara. Any additional advice on how the ideal candidate can put their best foot forward with this opportunity? I think the best advice I can give is that we're really looking for people who meet our eligibility criteria and folks who have these lived experiences that can help us understand environmental issues and how they affect underserved and or disadvantaged populations, because that's the objective of the program. And so that's really what we're looking for more deeply. And so that might be the best way to put your best foot forward. And if there's anything related to how we can support you to be successful in the role, those are additional details that that will be helpful to understand. But the interest form will be more helpful once it's released for you to be able to share the details that are relevant. Thank you so much for your question.
I see Tony's popped back on, so I think she's coming to answer the next question.
Oh, I will answer the next question. I hadn't looked at that. I'm actually popping back on because one of the earlier questions, I promised to drop a slide and share it with everyone. I think you all will see that I have a note there that says additional detail outlining the tiers. And it is not allowing me to drop that in the chat or in the Q&A. So I was wondering if I could do a quick steal of the screen and share this slide so that participants can screen grab it or take a picture of it, but also know that this particular slide and reference is on our YouTube, on our websites, and in the info session webinars that we've held before, but just wanted to make it really easy for you all. So while people are thinking of questions, all right, thanks. I just got the all clear from Patrick. So I am going to share my screen with you all while you're thinking of other questions here. I don't know why this is being so challenging today, but there we go. Do you all see that? It should say types of EJ TCGM opportunities with the tiers listed. Is everybody
Yes.
seeing it now? Okay. We're just going to keep it there. I tried to make it bigger for you all to make sure you could grab it without capturing all the other slides and made a mess. So we'll hold this here for a second to make sure that you all can grab that. And also happy to take any questions while we're holding this slide.
There's one more question for you.
Okay.
In the chat.
I
That
cannot.
relates to the application. Can you clarify if all the funds in the cooperative agreement have been received by RTI?
So yes, I can help with that. These are, like you mentioned, cooperative agreements that are executed in a drawdown style. So if you're asking if there's $100 million in RTI's account around the TCGM funding grants, there is not. But the award has been obligated to the agency, to the institute.
Thank you, Tony. All right, so if there are any other questions, we'll continue to stay on. This is scheduled for the full hour. I do want to plug in the opportunities next week for the reviewer sessions, to give you more of the insight into that process. This is another opportunity for you to participate and guide us, for this grant making strategy. And then here's my contact information. We did have our CAB coordinator online. I don't know if she's left yet, but there will be other opportunities to connect on that too. Thank you so much for your time and hope you all have a great week.